There's a little girl kneeling in a graveyard after dark, whispering to a dead man's headstone like he's the only safe place left in the world. She's 7 years old, she's alone, and she has two words inked on her wrist that nobody can explain. When a scarred Vietnam-era biker named Crow rolls through those cemetery gates and finds her there, everything he thought he knew about grief, about failure, about his dead son, gets torn apart in the space of a single cold October night. What this child is running from will shake you. What she's carrying will break you. Stay until the end. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching this from tonight. The motorcycle came in quiet. That was the first thing anyone would have noticed, if anyone had been watching, which no one was, because the Harriwick Municipal Cemetery closed at dusk, and the last groundskeeper had padlocked the main gate 40 minutes ago. But Gideon Vance had not used the main gate in 6 years. He came in through the service road on the north side, past the rusted maintenance shed and the stand of dying oak trees that shed their leaves in October like they were trying to get rid of something. He killed the engine 50 yards from the entrance and let the bike roll silent the last stretch, tires pressing into wet gravel without sound, without ceremony. He had done this every Friday since they put Ethan in the ground. The cold was the kind that didn't announce itself. It crept. It found the gaps between his jacket collar and the base of his neck, the exposed skin of his knuckles where the leather gloves had worn thin, the corner of the old shrapnel scar that ran from his left temple to the edge of his jaw. October in Harriwick, Pennsylvania, meant the kind of cold that remembered things. Cold that had been waiting all summer to come back and remind you what it felt like to have nothing insulating you from the dark. Crow, and nobody called him Gideon, hadn't in 30 years, not since the VA hospital in '74 when a nurse tried and the soldier in the next bed laughed until he coughed. Crow was 58 years old and built like a man who had been broken and healed wrong several times over. Wide through the shoulders, thick through the chest, a beard gone fully silver that he trimmed badly, and not often. He walked with a slight drag in his right leg, consequence of a piece of Vietnamese steel that the surgeons had gotten most of but not all of, and he wore a cut. The vest, the leather vest with its patches and its history and its weight, that had once belonged to a brotherhood he no longer formally rode with. The Iron Shepherd. M.C., Harriwick chapter, had dissolved 3 years ago when half the members moved on or died and the other half just stopped showing up. Crow kept the cut because it was the only thing he owned that still knew who he was. He parked beside the oak tree he always parked beside, the one with the hollow at its base, where something had lived once and didn't anymore. He didn't lock the bike. Nobody stole from this cemetery, not from this end of it anyway. The walk to Ethan's grave was 4 minutes at Crow's pace, past the older stones with their worn names, past the section where the Korean War veterans lay in their neat rows, past the small enclosure where the children's graves were marked with lambs and angels and toys left by parents who still came every week and probably always would. Crow always walked that section fast, had since the first time he came this way, and noticed a small stuffed rabbit sitting against a headstone with its button eyes looking out at nothing. He found Ethan's grave the way he always found it, without looking up. His feet knew the path. What his feet did not know, and what stopped him 4 steps short of the headstone, was the shape crouched in front of it, small. Dark coat too thin for the weather, hair loose and wet, which meant she'd been out here through the rain that had stopped an hour ago. Shoulders hunched in that particular way children hunch when they are very cold and pretending not to be. Both hands pressed flat against the base of the stone, not as if she were pushing it, but as if she were trying to feel whether something was on the other side. Crow stood very still. He had a discipline about stillness that had come from the war and stayed long after everything else from the war had become a liability. He could stop moving and become essentially invisible when he needed to, which had saved his life twice in the Mekong Delta and once in a parking lot in Trenton in 1987, and he employed it now not from tactical instinct but from something older and harder to name. The child hadn't heard him. Whatever she was doing at his son's grave, she was doing it with complete concentration, the kind that children brought to things that mattered enormously to them. He listened. She was talking, not loudly, not performing. The way people talk when they genuinely believe someone is listening and they're not sure they deserve the attention. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," she said. Her voice was small and careful, the voice of a child who had learned to take up very little space. I know you said not to come here. I know you said call the number first, but the phone... She stopped, pressed her hands harder against the stone. I couldn't use the phone. Crow's jaw tightened. Mom's not... Another stop. Longer. She doesn't wake up for dinner anymore. She says she's tired. But she was tired before and she still made dinner. This is different tired. The oak tree behind Crow dropped a single leaf. The child didn't flinch. I have the crane, she said, and held up something small and folded. A paper crane, the kind made from a single sheet of paper with deliberate folds, except this one was wrinkled, and the paper was dark with moisture. She'd been holding it so long it had absorbed the rain from her coat. I kept it dry as long as I could. Then she placed it against the base of the headstone, directly below Ethan's name, and sat back on her heels. And that was when she turned her head and saw Crow standing 10 feet away and made a sound that was not quite a scream. It was the suppressed version, the sound a child makes when screaming feels too dangerous to risk. She scrambled backward, knocked the paper crane sideways. Her boot caught on a divot in the ground and she went down on one knee and came back up with the speed of a small animal that has learned to fall and recover without pausing. Easy, Crow said. His voice came out lower than he intended. It always did when he was careful. He raised both hands. The gesture was automatic, the peacekeeper's gesture, though his hands were large and scarred and the gesture probably didn't look as unthreatening as it was meant to. The girl stood her ground, which surprised him. She was breathing fast, her eyes fixed on his face, cataloging him the way children cataloged adults they weren't sure about, searching for the specific thing that would tell her whether to run or stay. Her eyes went to his cut, to the iron shepherd patch on the front, to his face, to his hands, then back to his face. That's Ethan's dad, she said. Not to him, to the headstone. Crow felt something move in his chest. Not quite pain, not the kind he was used to. Yeah, he said, that's me. He showed me a picture. She hadn't moved. Her hands were at her sides, fingers splayed slightly, ready. You were younger. That was a long time ago. He said you were scary looking. He wasn't wrong. He also said you were safe. The word landed harder than she probably intended it to. Crow kept his hands up, kept his face still, kept the distance he was at. Around them, the cemetery breathed its quiet fog, the headstones rising from the October dark like teeth, and somewhere on the far side of the wall a car passed, and its headlights swept briefly across the sky. The girl turned her head sharply toward the gate. It was a fast, involuntary movement, the kind that comes from practice, from having learned that headlights mean something you need to track. Crow noticed. He was built for noticing. How long have you been out here? He asked. Since it started raining. A pause. Before it started raining. That's 3 hours. I know. You hungry? She looked back at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. But a recalculation. You're not supposed to feed kids you don't know, my teacher said. Your teacher's right. But you're Ethan's dad. I am. She seemed to weigh this for a moment, both hands still at her sides, eyes still doing that cataloging work. Then she bent down and picked up the paper crane from where it had fallen against the headstone, straightened it with the careful practice movements of someone who had made and repaired many paper cranes, and set it back in its place. My name is Lila, she said. Lila Hartwell. Crow lowered his hands. Gideon Vance. But everybody calls me Crow. Why? Long story. Okay. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. Is there somewhere warm? There was a chapel at the south end of the cemetery. It was small, barely large enough to hold 20 people, and it was used for brief services when the weather was bad and families needed shelter. The groundskeeper, a woman named Evelyn Shaw, who had managed Harrowick Municipal for 9 years, kept it unlocked from October through March on the understanding that people visiting graves in cold months sometimes needed a place to sit. There was a small electric heater that Evelyn had brought from her own house and plugged into the single outlet behind the door, and 2 rows of wooden pews worn smooth from decades of grieving hands, and a side table that always had a thermos of coffee on it, because Evelyn believed in practical comfort. Crow brought the girl there. He walked ahead by a few steps, and she followed at a specific distance that she maintained with the precision of someone who had calibrated exactly how far behind an adult she needed to stay to feel safe. He didn't close the gap. He kept his hands visible. He let her set the terms of the distance. Inside, the heater was running. The chapel smelled of old wood and coffee and something faintly like cedar, and the light was the warm amber of 2 table lamps with low wattage bulbs. It was the kind of light that softened things, the kind that made the outside dark seem farther away than it was. Lila took the pew closest to the heater and sat on the edge of it, her coat still on, the paper crane balanced on her knee. Crow sat in the pew across the aisle from her, not beside her, not crowding, and poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos, set one on the pew beside her with 6 inches of space between the cup and her hand. She looked at the cup. "I'm 9, she said. "Okay." "My mom says coffee stunts your growth." "She's not wrong about that either." "But I'm cold." "Yeah." A beat. She picked up the cup. Crow watched her wrap both hands around it and close her eyes for a moment, just absorbing the warmth. And he felt the specific and particular grief of a man watching a child who has been cold for longer than tonight, for longer than 3 hours in a graveyard. The kind of cold that came from inside a house. "How did you know Ethan?" he asked. She opened her eyes. "He helped us." "When?" "A few years ago, when Uncle Darren first moved in." A pause. A brief flicker behind her eyes that she controlled quickly. Mom was having a hard time, and the school sent someone, and Ethan was the someone they sent. Crow's jaw tightened again. He kept it off his face. "He was a teacher. He was the counselor." She said it with the gravity of a child who knew exactly what that word had meant in her life. "He came to our house 3 times. He brought groceries once and pretended he wasn't bringing groceries. He said he was bringing things left over from a food drive, and was it okay if we took some? But I knew." She looked at the paper crane. "He thought I was too young to notice. I wasn't." "You weren't," Crow agreed. "He taught me to make these." She lifted the crane slightly. "He said his grandmother taught him. He said every time you make one, you're supposed to put something in it. Not literally, but like mentally. Like you fold a problem into it. And then when it's done, the problem has a shape, and a shape is easier to deal with than a feeling that just floats around." Crow was quiet for a moment. He had not known this about his son. This specific detail, this particular piece of Ethan's inner life, had not reached him. It landed now with the precision of something thrown from very far away. "Did it work?" he asked. "The crane thing?" "Sometimes." She turned the crane over in her hands. "This one has been made and remade about 15 times. Same piece of paper. I keep unfolding it and starting over when the problem changes shape. What problem is in it now?" She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark brown, clear, old in the way that some children's eyes got old before their time. "My mom," she said, "and the thing that's wrong at our house, and whether anyone is going to help us or if I'm going to have to figure it out myself." The chapel door opened. It was not a dramatic entry. It was the careful, quiet entry of a woman who had been watching the light under the door for several minutes before deciding it was acceptable to knock and then deciding knocking was unnecessary. Evelyn Shaw was 63, built small and lean, with white hair cropped close and hands that were always slightly stained from the soil. Work she did even in October, maintaining things that needed maintaining. She had worked in this cemetery for 9 years, and before that had worked for the county as a social services caseworker for 22 years. And the combination of those 2 careers had given her a particular quality of observation that most people who met her did not immediately recognize as a form of professional expertise. She looked at the child. She looked at Crow. She looked at the coffee cups. "Evelyn," Crow said. "Crow." She came in, closed the door behind her, and sat in the pew behind Lila at an angle that felt natural and non-threatening because Evelyn Shaw had spent 2 decades learning how to position herself near frightened people. "Cold night to be out." "It is," Lila said. She had not flinched when the door opened. She had looked, assessed, held still. "I'm Evelyn. I take care of this place." "I know. I've seen you before." "When I came during the day." Lila paused. "I usually come during the day. I came at night tonight because—" She stopped. "Because something changed," Evelyn said. Lila looked at her. "Yeah. Do you want to tell us what changed?" The girl was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees and the chapel walls held it back, but didn't entirely muffle it. And the heater clicked and hummed, and the two table lamps cast their amber warmth over three people in a small wooden room surrounded by the dead and the cold and the particular silence of a Friday night in October. My mom hasn't been out of bed in 4 days, Lila said. Not for meals, not for school stuff, not when I knocked. She answers me. She talks, but she won't get up. And she keeps saying she's fine in a voice that people use when they're not fine, but they need you to stop asking. Crow's hands had gone still on his knees. Is there anyone else in the house? Evelyn asked. Uncle Darren. The way she said it, the two words arriving in the warm air with the specific weight of something that had been carried a long time. Is he family? Evelyn asked. He's my mom's brother. He moved in 2 years ago. A beat. He said he was going to help with bills. He said he knew people who could help with things. She stopped again. This stop was different from the previous ones. This one had a border, a line she was measuring whether to cross. He helps with things, but the house feels different since he came. Different how? Crow asked. She turned the paper crane over and over in her hands, twice, 3 times. Like there are rules I didn't agree to. And if I break them, my mom gets quieter. Not Darren. Mom. Like she pays for it. The chapel held that sentence for a long moment. Crow looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the girl. Lila, Evelyn said, and her voice had gone to the particular register that Crow recognized from the one time he had seen her speak to a young widow who had come in October 3 years ago and sat in this same pew and could not stop shaking. The register that was not performative comfort, but something more like a held hand in the dark. Can I ask what's on your wrist? The girl looked at her left wrist. She pulled the sleeve up slightly, not reluctantly, but with the resigned movement of someone who'd known the question was coming. On the inside of her wrist, in blue ballpoint ink, slightly smeared from the rain, ask Ethan. I wrote it myself, Lila said, last week, when things started getting bad again. Because Ethan always said, her voice tightened briefly, then released. He said if things ever got really bad, I should ask him. That was his rule. If the walls feel like they're closing in, you come find me. But she looked at the paper crane. He's not here, so I came to find where he is. And I thought maybe if I came to where he is, I'd know what he would say. Crow stood up, not quickly, not dramatically. He stood with the careful, deliberate movement of a man who had learned that abrupt movements disturbed things that needed to be still. He walked to the small window at the chapel's east wall and looked out at the cemetery, at the headstones silver gray in the thin light, at the oak trees, at the service road where his Harley sat. His son had told a child to come find him if things got bad. His son was 6 years in the ground, and this child had come anyway, because she had nowhere else to go, and she had sat beside his grave in the rain with a paper crane she'd folded and refolded 15 times, and she had trusted that a dead man's instructions were still worth following. She mentioned a letter, Crow said, not turning from the window. Ethan used to leave letters, formal ones in case of... He did that with some of his families. Legal things. I know about the letter, Lila said. Both adults looked at her. He told my mom about it, years ago. He said he was leaving instructions with someone, a lawyer maybe, or a file somewhere, and that if things ever got really bad and she needed help, the letter would explain. She always said she hoped she'd never need it. She paused. She can't get out of bed. I think she needs it now. Do you know where it is? Evelyn asked. No. But she reached into the inside pocket of her coat and produced a folded piece of paper, slightly damp at the edges, but intact. He left me this. A long time ago. He said keep it, and one day it would make sense. She held it out. Crow crossed the room and took it from her gently, because she was offering it and because she needed it received with the care she was offering it with. He unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, Ethan's handwriting. Crow knew his son's handwriting even after 6 years, the slightly left-leaning letters, the way he wrote his lowercase e like a small backwards 3. And it said, Lila. If you're reading this without me, it means you were brave enough to look for help when you needed it. That makes you the bravest person in any room you walk into. The man who can help you is named Gideon Vance. He's my dad. I know that might sound strange. I know he looks scary. He is a little bit scary. but he has never once in his life turned away from someone who needed protecting, even when it cost him everything. Tell him I said, the debt runs the other way. He'll know what that means. Make him a crane if he doesn't believe you. Crow read the note twice. Then he folded it, very carefully, back to the way it had come. The debt runs the other way, Lila said quietly, watching his face. Crow said nothing for a long moment. The heater clicked. The wind moved outside. He wrote that for you, he finally said. His voice had gone rough at the edges in a way he couldn't smooth out. He knew you'd need it. He used to say he planned for things he hoped wouldn't happen. She tilted her head. Do you know what it means, the thing about the debt? Crow turned the folded note over in his hands once. He did know. He knew exactly what it meant, and the knowing was a specific kind of violence. The gentle kind, the kind that came from understanding something you'd had wrong for a very long time. For 6 years, Crow had believed his son died thinking his father had failed him. Ethan had been kind and principled and had chosen a life of careful, quiet service, and Crow had been rough and angry and had spent Ethan's childhood in and out of the VA system, in and out of the brotherhood, not present enough, not gentle enough, not the father that a son like Ethan deserved. They had been close at the end, closer than they'd ever been. But Crow had always believed that Ethan's kindness toward him was forgiveness, the tolerance of a gentle man for a broken one. The debt runs the other way meant something different. It meant that Ethan had seen something in his father worth documenting, worth trusting, worth sending a frightened child toward in the dark. Yeah, Crow said. I know what it means. Before he could say anything else, Lila stood up suddenly and turned toward the chapel door. Someone's coming, she said. Crow heard it a second later. The sound of a car engine on the cemetery's service road, moving slowly, the way cars moved when they were looking for something. The headlights swept briefly across the chapel's small window, and the girl went rigid in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Evelyn stood up. Her hand went to the table instinctively, steadying herself. The car stopped. The engine died. A door opened. Crow moved to the window. The car was a gray Jeep Cherokee, late model, parked 20 yards from the chapel. The man who got out was somewhere in his early 40s, compact and clean-cut, wearing a fleece-lined jacket and moving with the confident ease of a man who had never had reason to move any other way. He looked around the cemetery in the unhurried fashion of a man who was comfortable owning whatever space he occupied. Then he looked at the chapel. Darren, Lila said, behind Crow. She said it the way you say a word that has stopped meaning what it was supposed to mean and now means something else entirely. Crow watched the man walk toward the chapel door. There was nothing in his posture that announced danger, no aggression, no urgency. The careful, measured movements of a man who understood that the impression he made in the first 15 seconds was a form of control. He'll be nice, Lila said. Her voice had flattened. He's always nice when there are other people. Stay behind me, Crow said. He'll say I ran away. He'll say Mom is worried. He'll say, Lila. Crow turned to look at her. Stay behind me. She looked at his face. Whatever she found there, the scar, the set of his jaw, the 6 years of grief, and the thing Ethan's note had just rearranged in him, made her go still in a different way than the cold had made her still. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of someone who has just remembered that not all dangerous things are aimed at them. She stepped behind him. The chapel door opened. Darren Pike stood in the doorway with the expression of a concerned uncle. Relief, mild exasperation, the careful warmth of a man playing a role he'd rehearsed, and took in the scene with quick, intelligent eyes. Crow in the center of the room, Evelyn at the table, Lila behind Crow's left shoulder. Oh, thank God, Darren said, and his voice was warm and well-modulated and carried just the right amount of relief. Lila, your mom has been so worried. Your mom is in bed, Crow said. Darren's eyes moved to Crow. A fraction of a second of recalibration, invisible if you didn't know to look for it. I'm sorry? The girl said her mother's been in bed 4 days and hasn't come out for meals. Crow's voice was flat and even, the register of a man stating facts in a situation where he intended facts to be the primary language. If her mom has been so worried, she got out of bed to worry. A beat of silence. Darren's expression stayed warm. That was the thing about it. It stayed. That was the tell. A real expression would have shifted, even slightly, even for a fraction of a second. This one was a held position. Naomi It's been a difficult week, Darren said. She has some health concerns she's been dealing with. Lila knows that. Sweetheart, your mom asked me to find you. Don't call her sweetheart, Crow said. Another beat. Darren looked at him with the patient expression of a man deciding whether this obstacle was worth the energy it would take to move. I don't think I caught your name, Darren said. I didn't give it. Are you a relative? A friend of the family? Doesn't matter what I am, Crow said. What matters is that a 9-year-old child was alone in a cemetery in the rain for 3 hours because she couldn't use the phone at home and she had nowhere else to go. And you drove here to collect her instead of calling emergency services, which is what a man does when he's genuinely worried about a child's welfare. Darren's smile didn't waver, but something behind it shifted. A pressure, very slight, like the tightening of a lid. I don't think that's quite fair, Darren said. I've been very supportive of Naomi and Lila during a difficult period. Evelyn, Crow said, without looking at the woman behind him. Calling now, Evelyn said, and her phone was already out. Darren's eyes tracked to Evelyn. The warmth in his face underwent a small but definitive change, not disappearing, not cracking, but compressing, becoming thinner, a portrait being moved to a smaller frame. I'm not sure that's necessary, Darren said. Lila is safe. We can all go home, and she's staying here until we know her mother is okay, Crow said. You can't just... Darren stopped, adjusted, recalibrated again, which was faster this time, the adjustment smoother, because he was very good at this. I understand you may be concerned, and I appreciate that, but Lila is my niece, and I have every right to come to a closed cemetery after dark to retrieve a child instead of calling the police when you noticed she was missing. Crow took one step forward. Just one. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move his hands. But something in the step changed the geometry of the room. How long was she missing before you came looking? Behind him, Lila made a small sound. Not a word. The sound of a child recognizing that a question has been asked that she has been afraid to ask out loud. Darren looked at Crow for a long moment. The cemetery was quiet around the chapel. The 2 table lamps cast their amber warmth. The heater clicked. I'd like to speak with you outside, Darren said. His voice had not changed. That was almost the most frightening thing. No, Crow said. In the silence that followed, Evelyn spoke quietly into her phone, giving the address, requesting a welfare check. Darren looked at the room. At Crow. At Evelyn with the phone. At the girl behind Crow's left shoulder with the paper crane pressed against her chest. At the exit. At the math of the situation as it had just rearranged itself. This is a misunderstanding, he said. The warmth in his voice had thinned to a veneer to something like the image of warmth rather than warmth itself. I want that to be clear. Lila, I love you. Your mom loves you. We're going to sort this out. She's not going anywhere with you tonight, Crow said. Darren held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Crow counted them. Then Darren stepped back from the doorway, and the door swung mostly closed behind him, but didn't latch, and through the gap came the sound of his footsteps on the gravel, moving back toward the Jeep, but not leaving. Waiting. He'll call someone, Lila said. Her voice was very quiet, very controlled. Let him, Crow said. He has people. He knows. He knows how to make things look okay when they're not. I know, Crow said. He turned back to the room. Evelyn was off the phone, watching him. Lila was still gripping the crane. So do I. He walked back to the pew he'd been sitting in and sat down. He looked at the note, still folded in his hand. Ethan's handwriting, Ethan's voice, that backwards E, and the careful slope of every letter from a man who had written things down because he believed words were something you could give people. He has never once in his life turned away from someone who needed protecting, even when it cost him everything. Outside, the Jeep sat in the dark with its engine off and its headlights dark, waiting. Inside the chapel, Lila Hartwell sat with a paper crane and a cold cup of coffee, and 2 adults who hadn't left, and outside in the cemetery, his son's name was carved into stone under October stars. And somewhere across Harwick, a woman named Naomi was in a bed she hadn't left in 4 days, while a man who understood how to look concerned moved pieces on a board she couldn't see. Crow looked at Evelyn. You said Ethan used to file things here, he said, when he worked with families. You told me once he filed things. Evelyn's face changed, slightly, the way a face changes when a memory arrives with unexpected weight. He did. He used to leave sealed envelopes in the chapel's storage cabinet when he had families he was worried about. He said it was his informal archive. She stopped. I haven't thought about that in a long time. Is the cabinet still there? Evelyn looked at the old wooden cabinet against the chapel's back wall, the one with the iron latch, the one that nobody opened because there was no reason to open it. Yes, she said. Is Lila's family name in there? The silence stretched. Outside, the gravel shifted under the Jeep's tires as the engine turned over. And then, a sound that changed everything. Not from outside, from deeper in the cemetery, from the service road entrance, the sound that Crow had been making every Friday night for 6 years without ever imagining it would become relevant to anything but his own grief. The deep, low, specific rumble of a Harley-Davidson engine. Then a second. Then a third. Crow knew those bikes. He knew the engines the way you know voices. Lila stood up from the pew, very slowly, and moved to the window to look, and what she saw made her turn back to Crow with an expression that he would remember for the rest of his life. Not fear. Not anymore. Who are they? She said. Crow looked at his hands, at Ethan's folded note, at the girl. People who don't leave, he said, and the cabinet against the back wall waited, latched and silent, holding whatever Ethan had thought worth preserving from the time before he died, from the careful, quiet work of a man who had planned for things he hoped wouldn't happen. Crow crossed the room to the cabinet. He reached for the latch. Outside, the motorcycles had gone silent, but Darren Pike's Jeep had not moved, and the welfare check was 20 minutes out. And somewhere in Harriwick, Naomi Hartwell hadn't come out of her room in 4 days. The latch was cold under Crow's fingers. He opened the cabinet. The cabinet smelled of old paper and cedar and something faintly chemical. The particular smell of documents that had been sealed for a long time in a space that was not quite dry and not quite damp, the smell of things preserved by intention rather than condition. Crow pulled the iron latch and the door swung outward on hinges that needed oil, a sound like a small complaint, and inside were 3 rows of wooden shelving holding a collection of manila envelopes in various states of age, each one labeled in black marker in a handwriting that was not Ethan's. Evelyn was beside him before he'd fully gotten the door open. He brought me the envelopes, she said, her voice low. I didn't know what was in them. He said he called them contingency files. He said if anything ever happened to him, and if any of the families ever came looking, I should know the files were here. She paused. Nobody ever came looking, until tonight. Crow ran his fingers along the label edges. Names, dates, a code system he didn't immediately understand, 2 letters followed by a number, written on each envelope in the same black marker. He scanned until he found HW4 and stopped. Hartwell, Evelyn said, reading over his shoulder. The number might be a case year, 4 years before he died. Crow pulled the envelope. It was sealed with a strip of packing tape across the flap, and it was heavier than he expected, not thick, but dense, like whatever was inside had been compressed. He turned it over. On the back, in Ethan's handwriting, that unmistakable backwards E, were 3 words, open if necessary. Behind them, Lila had not moved from her position near the heater. She was watching with the contained attention of a child who had learned to observe adult actions carefully and draw conclusions from small signals. Crow glanced at her. This is yours, he said. Your family's. You understand that. I know. I'm going to open it. I know that too. He opened it. Inside was a folded document, 3 pages, the outer one a formal letter typed on school district letterhead with Ethan's name in the header, and beneath the document, a smaller sealed envelope, this one white, with a single name written on the front in Ethan's hand. Gideon. Crow stared at it. The heater clicked. Outside, the motorcycles were still silent, but Crow could hear boots on gravel, plural sets, moving with the particular deliberate patience of men who had decided to stay and were letting that decision be known without announcing it. Through the chapel's small east window, the ambient light had shifted slightly. Someone had positioned a bike where its headlight could backlight the Jeep without being aggressive about it. That would be Marcus. Crow pocketed the envelope with his name on it without opening it. He unfolded the typed document. Evelyn read alongside him. The letter was addressed to the Harriwick Department of Child and Family Services and dated 4 years before Ethan's death, which meant Ethan had written it 2 years into his work with the Hartwell family, 2 years into whatever he had seen and cataloged and been unable to formally report without proof. The language was careful and procedural, the language of a man who understood the system he was working within and was threading a needle, not accusatory, not inflammatory, but specific. Specific in the way that specificity becomes its own form of accusation. It described observed behavioral changes in Naomi Hartwell over a period of 18 months. It described the child, Lila, exhibiting what Ethan clinically termed hypervigilance behaviors consistent with household stress, including the cataloging of adult movement, avoidance of direct eye contact with certain adults, and a pattern of calibrating speech volume in the presence of her uncle, Darren Pike. The letter noted that Darren Pike had, on 2 occasions when Ethan arrived unannounced at the Hartwell residence, been present and had managed the conversation in a way that Ethan described as socially proficient deflection, answering questions before Naomi could, redirecting Ethan's attention toward positive indicators, and creating a general impression of a functional, supported household that did not fully align with what Ethan observed in Lila's behavior at school in the days immediately following those visits. The letter also noted one other thing. Ethan had filed this report with the department, and the department had closed the case after a single follow-up visit, citing no evidence of reportable harm. Crow folded the letter. "He tried," Evelyn said, quietly. "He tried," Crow agreed. His voice was very flat. "And they closed it." He looked at the document again. "Single visit. Darren probably managed it the same way he managed that doorway 20 minutes ago." He put the letter back in the envelope. "Man like that. He's been doing this a long time, long enough to get smooth." "What does the other envelope say?" Lila asked. Crow looked at her. She was still on the edge of the pew, still holding the crane, but she had straightened slightly, and her eyes were on the envelope in his jacket pocket, the white one with his name. "I haven't opened it yet." "Why?" He didn't have a clean answer for that, so he didn't give one. He pulled the envelope out, looked at his name in his dead son's handwriting, and opened it. It was a single page. Not typed. Handwritten, both sides, in the same carefully slanted script as the note he'd already read, but longer, denser. The writing of a man who had more to say than he expected, and had pushed into the margins rather than stop. Crow read it. He read it twice. When he folded it, his hands were not entirely steady, which was something that almost never happened. "Crow." Evelyn's voice was careful. "He named me," Crow said. His voice had gone to a register that was barely above the ambient sound of the heater. "As he wrote a letter, a formal letter, naming me as the individual Naomi Hartwell should contact if she ever needed help and had no other recourse." He stopped. "He filed it with his attorney. He set it up so that if Naomi ever invoked it, I would have documented standing to intervene on her behalf, to act as an advocate." He stopped again. "He wrote that I was—" He stopped a third time. "He wrote that you were a protector," Lila said. Crow looked at her. "He told me that," she said, "a long time ago. He said his dad was a protector. He said it was in his blood and his bones, and no matter what had happened between them, that didn't change." The chapel was very quiet. Outside, the gravel crunched. Not the Jeep. The Jeep hadn't moved. Boots. One set, approaching the chapel door, and then a knock that was not really a question. 3 beats, evenly spaced. The knock of a man who knocked as a courtesy rather than a request. Crow crossed to the door and opened it. Marcus Webb stood on the chapel step. He was 52 years old, black, 6'2", with a shaved head and a salt and pepper beard, and the kind of still, dense physical presence that people instinctively made room for in crowds without knowing why they were doing it. He wore his iron shepherd cut. His still had the chapter rocker on the back, the one that said Harriwick, and beneath it a heavy flannel shirt and a canvas jacket that was inadequate for the temperature and that he wore anyway because he refused to acknowledge cold as a meaningful variable. His eyes moved past Crow into the chapel, took in Evelyn, took in Lila, took in the open cabinet and the envelopes. Then they moved back to Crow. "Heard the call on the scanner," Marcus said. "I know." brought Hendricks and Boone. I know that too. Crow leaned in the doorway. The Jeep. We see it. Marcus glanced back toward the cemetery road. He's been on his phone since we pulled in. Hasn't gotten out again. He's calling someone. Yeah. Marcus looked at Crow with the particular directness of a man who had known another man for 3 decades and had no use for the social padding most people inserted into difficult conversations. What do you need? Welfare check is coming, 20 minutes, maybe less. I need someone out front when they arrive so Darren doesn't manage the approach. Meaning you want a face between him and the responding officers. Meaning I want him to not be the first person those officers hear from. Marcus nodded once. No argument. No discussion of whether this was wise or advisable. Marcus Webb had spent 15 years as a heroic firefighter before a structural collapse took 2 of his fingers and most of his right knee's cartilage and ended that career. And before that, he had done 2 tours in the Gulf. And the sum of those experiences had given him a very simple calculus about which situations required analysis and which required action. He had applied this calculus to Crow's requests for as long as they had known each other. And he applied it now. The kid, Marcus said. Quietly, pitched so it didn't carry. She's the reason we're here. She okay? She's been out here since before the rain. Came because she couldn't use the phone at home. Marcus looked at the girl through the open door. Lila looked back at him with her dark, old eyes, and Marcus Webb, who had 3 daughters and 2 grandchildren, and who had lost a brother in Fallujah and carried it every day in the set of his jaw, held her gaze for a moment with the specific gentleness of a large man who understood exactly what it meant for a child to be in a place like this, in weather like this for reasons like those. Okay, he said, and stepped back from the door, and went to do what he'd been asked. Crow came back inside and closed the door. Evelyn had poured more coffee and set a second cup on the pew beside Lila's. The girl was drinking hers, both hands around it, watching Crow come back with the particular attention she brought to all his movements now. The attention of someone recalibrating based on new data. Who are they? She asked. People I rode with. A long time ago. And not so long ago. Crow sat back down. They heard the scanner call and came. Just because they heard it? Because they heard my bike was here. He looked at the old envelopes in the cabinet, at the 6 years of dust on the shelves above them, at the iron latch hanging open. When things go sideways, we come. Does that work? Having people come? Sometimes. What about the times it doesn't? He looked at her. She was asking a real question, not the rhetorical version, not the child's version. She'd been alone with a problem for long enough that she needed to understand the realistic parameters of whatever help was arriving. Then you deal with what's left after, he said. But you deal with it with people beside you instead of alone. Lila thought about this. Turned the crane over in her hands. Ethan said something like that once. About cranes. He said the reason his grandmother made so many was that she'd had hard years and she didn't want to face them without giving them a shape. So she made a crane for each hard year and she lined them up on a shelf so she could look at them and say, I carried that, and I'm still here. Crow looked at the crane. How many cranes have you made? He asked. A lot. She said it simply, without drama, which made it land harder than drama would have. The door opened again without a knock this time. Evelyn had propped it slightly, and through the gap came a man who was not Marcus and not Hendricks and not Boone. He was younger than any of them, early 30s with reddish hair cut close and a face that still carried the remnants of a bruise along the left cheekbone. 3 days old, maybe 4, the kind of bruise that came from something fast and targeted. He wore an iron shepherd cut with a prospect patch, which meant he was newer, still earning it, and he came in with the slightly wired energy of someone who had been sitting outside in the cold, working himself up to something. His name was Reed Caulfield. He had been prospecting with the remnants of the Heroic chapter for 7 months. Crow did not fully trust him yet, which was not a judgment. It was a protocol, applied to everyone who hadn't yet proven the full shape of themselves. She's a kid, Reed said, looking at Lila. His voice was not hostile. It was the voice of a young man trying to process something that disturbed him and not having sufficient practice at processing such things without his face showing it. Reed, Crow said. Sorry, Reed stopped. His jaw worked. He was looking at the bruise on his own reflection in the chapel's small window, probably because his hand went briefly to his cheekbone. Sorry, I've been out there and I can't. What's the situation with the Jeep? He's waiting for whoever he called. How long do we have before that becomes a problem? Depends on who he called. Marcus thinks he called someone in the county system. Crow looked at him more carefully. Why does Marcus think that? Because he's been on the phone for 12 minutes and he hasn't looked anxious once. Reed's voice had steadied. He had the kind of intelligence that came from watching rather than talking, which was one of the things Crow had noticed about him in the 7 months, and it was one of the reasons the prospect patch was still on rather than off. Anxious people pace, scared people move. He's been standing still next to that Jeep for 12 minutes talking on his phone, and he keeps nodding like the conversation is going the way he expected. Crow stood up. Evelyn, he said, the document from Ethan's file. The report he filed with Child Services, the one that got closed. Is there a case number on it? Evelyn picked up the report, scanned. Yes. I need you to call the department's after-hours line and ask about the status of that case. Who handled it? Who did the follow-up visit? Whether it's still technically open or whether it was formally closed. Evelyn looked at him with the expression of a woman who had spent 22 years in social services and understood exactly what he was asking her to look for. You think the follow-up was handled by someone Darren knows? I think a man who stands next to his car for 12 minutes talking on his phone without getting anxious has a reason to be confident, Crow said. And I want to know what that reason is before the welfare check arrives, and whoever he called gets here first. Evelyn was already dialing. Reed shifted his weight in the doorway. Crow looked at him. What happened to your face? Crow said. Reed's hand went to his cheekbone again. Reflexive, not the conscious touch. The reflexive kind. Last week. I know when. What happened? A pause. Reed looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at Crow, in the sequence of a man deciding whether the question was one he could afford to answer honestly. Darren Pike, he said. The chapel went very still. Say that again, Crow said. I've been watching the house. Reed's voice had gone quieter, the wired energy flattening into something more controlled. For 2 weeks. Not officially. I didn't say anything because I didn't have anything solid and I knew you'd tell me to wait. But I've been watching the house. Why? Because of Boone. Reed glanced at the door, checking, then back. Boone's sister lives 2 streets over from the Hartwell place. She told him 3 months ago that the woman next door, she didn't know her name, she called her the one with the little girl, that she'd stopped answering the door. That the little girl came to her house once in the morning, asking to use the phone, and the uncle showed up 10 minutes later to collect her, and the little girl didn't look at the ground or anything. She looked fine, but she didn't say goodbye. Crow kept his eyes on Reed. Boone told me. I started watching the house. 2 weeks ago, I was in the alley behind it at dusk, and Darren came out and found me there, and he... Reed touched his cheekbone again. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask who I was. He looked at me for about 3 seconds, and then he hit me once, and then he said, "Stay off my street," and went back inside. You didn't tell me, Crow said. No. Why? Reed's jaw tightened. Because I didn't want you to pull me from the watch, and because... He stopped, pulled in a breath. Because I was embarrassed. Because I didn't see it coming, and it came fast and clean, and that means he's done it before. You don't hit like that without practice. He held Crow's gaze. I should have told you. I know that. I'm telling you now. Crow was quiet for a moment. You've been watching for 2 weeks, he said. What else did you see? Reed pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Not a letter. A handwritten list, the kind you made when you were noting times and dates without being sure what the notes were for yet. He held it out, and Crow took it and read it, and the list contained 6 weeks of irregular observations, arrivals, departures, lights on and off, the girl's school schedule, and when she came home versus when she should have, 2 instances of a second vehicle at the house late at night, and 1 note at the bottom in Reed's cramped handwriting. Man in the second vehicle matches a County Family Services badge photo I found. Name, Victor Slade. Caseworker, Herwick. CFS. Visited the house on a Tuesday afternoon and stayed 40 minutes and left smiling. Evelyn turned from her phone call with the expression of a woman who had just confirmed something she already knew. The case was closed by a caseworker named Victor Slade, she said. He conducted the single follow-up visit. He noted no indicators of concern and recommended case closure. She paused. He is currently the department's senior case supervisor. Meaning he's the one who decides which cases get serious attention, Crow said, and which don't. The sound outside changed. 2 cars now, the gravel crunching under more weight, and then the brief burp of a police radio, and then voices. Not the welfare check responding officers. Too fast. Not enough time had elapsed. Someone had called the police directly, and someone had called them first. Crow went to the window. There were 2 cruisers at the cemetery gate, and beside them Darren Pike was speaking to a uniformed officer with the body language of a man giving a prepared statement. Relaxed shoulders, direct eye contact, the occasional gestured emphasis that read as cooperative and credible from 20 yards away. A second officer had separated from the group and was walking toward the chapel. Behind the cruisers, a plain sedan had pulled in, and a man in street clothes had gotten out. Gray jacket, department lanyard visible at 20 yards, the specific posture of a county bureaucrat who had been called from home and was inconvenienced about it, but not surprised by it. "That's Slade," Reed said beside Crow's shoulder. Crow looked at the man, medium height, 50-something, the slightly doughy appearance of a man who had held a desk job for 20 years, and before that had been something harder, and the transition hadn't been entirely clean. He was walking toward Darren and the officers, not toward the chapel, and as he arrived, Darren turned and the 2 of them exchanged something. Not a handshake, something subtler, the brief acknowledgement of men who had a system and the system was working. "Crow." Marcus's voice from outside, low and close to the door. "We've got a problem." Crow opened the door. Marcus stood on the step, and past him, Crow could see Hendricks and Boone positioned at a loose distance from the arriving officers. Not blocking, not confrontational, but present, which was its own language. Hendricks was 60, missing the tip of his left index finger from a machinery accident in 1998, and had the slow-burning stillness of a man who had been in worse situations than this and had come out the other side patient. Boone was 44, former Army MP, and was looking at the plain sedan and the man who'd gotten out of it with an expression that told Crow the confirmation in Reed's notes was connecting to something Boone had been carrying for longer than 2 weeks. "The responding officer," Marcus said. "He's telling them the call was a misunderstanding. He's telling them Lila ran from home after a family argument, and she's safe, and the family is here to collect her." "He doesn't know about Naomi," Crow said. "No, and Darren hasn't mentioned the welfare check, just the runaway minor." "Where's the responding unit from the welfare call?" "Not here yet, but Slade's in the mix now, and he's already talking to the first unit, and he's going to recommend they stand down," Crow said. "Family matter. Kid's safe. No indicators. He'll write a note in his system that this was a false alarm, and by the time the actual welfare responders arrive, there'll already be a county caseworker on record saying everything is fine." Marcus's face was doing the thing it did when he was working through anger without showing it. A slight flattening, a lowering of the brow. "So what do you want to do?" "I want to know what Naomi looks like right now," Crow said. "I want someone at that house in the next 10 minutes. "I can go," Boone said, from the dark behind Marcus. "You know where it is?" "My sister's 2 streets over." "Go quiet. Look, don't touch. If she's responsive, you stay with her until the welfare check arrives. If she's not—" Crow stopped. "Call me directly." Boone was already moving. "What about Darren?" Marcus said. "He's not taking that girl tonight." Crow's voice was level, without heat, which was more convincing than heat. "He can call whoever he wants. He can have Slade walk over here personally and recommend anything he likes. That child does not get in that Jeep." "The officers will have jurisdiction, Crow. If they decide she goes, then we make sure they hear a different story before they decide." He looked at Marcus. "Evelyn has a document, a formal report filed 4 years ago, naming Darren Pike as a person of concern in this household. The case was closed improperly by a caseworker who has since been observed visiting the household socially. I want that document in the responding officer's hand before Slade gets a chance to brief him." Marcus absorbed this. "You know how this looks. Bikers blocking a police response. Refusing to release a minor to family. I know exactly how it looks. It looks like we're the problem." "It always looks like we're the problem," Crow said. "That doesn't change what the problem actually is." Marcus looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he looked over his shoulder at the arriving officers and the man in the gray jacket and the Jeep still sitting in the dark with Darren beside it, patient and confident and waiting. "All right," Marcus said, and turned to handle what needed handling. Crow went back inside. Layla was still on the pew. Evelyn was beside her now, not touching, not performing comfort, but close in the way that people who had worked in care professions were close. The proximity that said, "I'm here," without making demands about what that should mean to the other person. The girl looked at Crow when he came back in. "Is he going to take me?" she said. "No." "You sound very sure." "I am." "How?" Crow sat across from her. He looked at the paper crane in her hands, worn at all the fold lines from being made and unmade and made again, the crane of a child who had given a problem a shape 15 times because the problem kept changing. He looked at the handwriting on his dead son's envelope, still in his jacket pocket, the one he hadn't fully processed because processing it would take more space than this night had available. "Because I'm going to give the officers a reason to make a different call," he said. "And because there are men outside who will stay here until it's done, and Darren knows that going loud makes things worse for him, not better." "He's not loud," Lila said. "He's never loud. That's the thing." "I know." "Loud you can prove. Loud leaves marks." She was looking at the crane. "He's never loud." "Evelyn's document names him," Crow said. "My son's document names him. And you're here, Lila. You're here and you're alive and you're sitting in this chapel and you came here because you needed someone and you found someone, and that matters. Courts talk about patterns. The pattern goes back 4 years in those documents." "Patterns take time," she said. "My mom doesn't have a lot of time." "I know." He looked at her directly. Boone went to check on her. Something shifted in the girl's face. The very first indication of relief. The small muscular release around her eyes that came when a person stops bracing entirely for a moment. "Is Boone one of the motorcycle people?" "Yes." "Can he get in?" "Darren changed the lock 6 months ago." Crow reached for his phone and dialed Boone before the sentence was fully finished. 3 rings. "Yeah," Boone said, the low murmur of a man speaking from a moving vehicle. "She changed the locks 6 months ago, or he did? Same locks?" A pause. "I know a window on the east side that doesn't close all the way. My sister mentioned it. Her cat gets in." "Go," Crow said, and hung up. Lila was watching him. "His sister's cat gets in," she repeated. "Apparently." "Okay." She turned the crane over. "Okay, that's... okay. Talk to me," Crow said. "About your mom. What does she look like when you go in?" "She's in bed. Lying on her side facing the wall. The curtains are closed. It smells like..." She stopped briefly. "Like she hasn't been drinking water. Like the air in the room has been the same air for a few days." Her voice was steady, but the effort of steadying it was visible. The slight tension in her jaw, the deliberate breath before each sentence. "She answers when I talk. She says she's fine and she loves me and she'll be up soon." Same sentences, like she practiced them. "Is there medication in the house?" Lila looked at him. "Darren brings her things. He says they're from the doctor. She started taking them about 6 months ago, around when he changed the locks." She paused. "They come in a little amber bottle, but there's no pharmacy label." Crow was very still. "What does she do after she takes them?" Evelyn asked, gently, from beside the girl. "She gets quieter," Lila said. "She's already quiet, but she gets more quiet, like the volume goes down. She laughs less. She stopped calling her sister, my aunt. She said she'd been too tired to call, but she used to call every week." She paused. "The last time my aunt called the house, Darren answered and said Mom was asleep. I was right there. Mom was in the kitchen." The chapel was very quiet for a moment. Then Crow's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Not Boone. An unfamiliar number. Local area code. No name. He answered, a woman's voice. Thin, rough at the edges, the voice of someone speaking at low volume with effort. "Is this... Are you Ethan's father?" Crow's chest tightened. "Yes." "Lila? Is she..." "She's here. She's safe. She's right here." He stood and crossed to Lila and held the phone out, and the girl took it with both hands, the crane balanced on her knee. "Mom?" Lila said. a sound from the phone that wasn't a word. "Mom, I'm okay. I'm with Ethan's dad. I found his dad." She was gripping the phone very hard, her knuckles white, her voice doing the thing it had been doing all night, staying level through visible effort. "I'm okay. Where are you?" Crow could not hear the reply, but he watched Lila's face, and he saw what the reply did to it, the brief, sharp contraction of every muscle, the sudden glassiness in the dark eyes, the single compressed breath. "She's at the house," Lila said, holding the phone out to Crow. "She says she's at the house, and she woke up, and she tried to get up, and she stopped. Her jaw was very tight. "She fell." Crow took the phone. "Naomi, this is Gideon Vance. My son was Ethan. I'm calling someone right now to come to you. Stay on the phone. Can you stay on the phone?" A sound from the other end. Affirmative, barely. He dialed Boone on the second phone, Reed's, which Reed held out without being asked, and said, "She's on the floor, she fell. Move fast," and heard Boone's engine open up in the background of the call before he could respond. Then the chapel door opened, and it was the responding officer. Young, maybe 26, the slightly stiff bearing of someone not fully comfortable in uncertain domestic situations, and behind him, at a distance that was designed to look incidental but wasn't, Victor Slade. The officer looked at Crow, at the phone in his hand, at the girl on the pew with the other phone pressed against her ear, at Evelyn, at Reed standing against the wall, at the open cabinet with the envelopes. "Sir," the officer said, "I need to ask you to step outside. The child's mother just called," Crow said. "She's on the floor of her home and can't get up. I have a man en route to her right now. I also have documentation." He looked at Evelyn. Evelyn held up the report. 3 pages, school district letterhead, 4 years old, naming Darren Pike, and a closed case and a caseworker whose name was currently standing 12 feet outside this chapel, wearing a department lanyard. "Filed 4 years ago by a licensed school district counselor," Crow said. "Closed after a single visit by a caseworker named Victor Slade. That man," he did not raise his voice, did not point, did not theatricalize, "is currently outside. He was present at this scene before the welfare check arrived. He was called here." He held the officer's gaze. "That child's mother is on her bedroom floor right now. Whatever Victor Slade has told you about this situation in the last 10 minutes, you need to hear the other version before you make any decisions." The young officer was doing the calculus. Crow could see it, the weighing of competing authorities, the instinct for the clear path versus the difficult one, the years of training colliding with the specific texture of this room, this woman, this document, this girl with the paper crane and the phone pressed to her face saying, "Mom, just breathe, Boone is coming." Slade appeared in the doorway behind the officer. He was not looking at Crow or Evelyn or the document. He was looking at Lila, and Lila was looking back at him, and there was something in her face that Crow had not seen before in this long night. Not fear, not the managed calm, not the strategic reserve. Recognition. The specific, flat recognition of a child seeing a person who had come to her house before and left smiling while nothing changed. "I know him," she said. Both adults looked at her, "He came to our house," she said, "last year. He sat in the kitchen and Darren made coffee and they talked for a long time and then he left." She looked at Slade. "You told my mom everything was going to be fine." Slade's expression was proficient and unmoved. "I conduct home visits as part of routine." "She told you about the pills," Lila said. Her voice had stopped being careful. Not loud. It was not loud. But the carefulness had dropped. The management of it. The calibration. And what was underneath was not hysteria or drama. It was the clear, cold voice of a child who was done pretending she hadn't noticed things. "She told you. I heard her from the hallway. She said Darren brought her things, and she didn't know what they were, and she was scared. And you wrote something down and said you'd follow up, and you left." The silence in the chapel had the quality of something held very tightly. "And you never followed up," Lila said. Slade's jaw moved. "Young lady." "Her name is Lila Hartwell," Crow said. He said it quietly, but it closed something, put a wall around it. "She is 9 years old, and she has been in this cemetery for 4 hours in October because she had nowhere else to go. Her mother is on the floor of her bedroom. And the caseworker who was supposed to protect her family is standing in this doorway right now, arriving here not as a responder, but as a... He paused. Let it sit. You can finish that sentence yourself. The young officer turned and looked at Slade. It was a small movement, a fraction of a rotation, but it was definitive. The look of a man who has been told one story and is now holding it against a second story and finding the first one has a new shape. Crow's phone buzzed. Boone. He answered. She's breathing, Boone said, and exhaled once, long. She's on the floor, and she's got a bruise on her hip from the fall, and she's confused and weak, but she's breathing, and she knows her name, and she knows Lila's name. A pause. There's an amber bottle on the nightstand. No label. I'm not touching it. Don't touch it, Crow said. Stay with her. I'm sending a second unit. He looked at the young officer. I need you to dispatch an ambulance to 417 Colton Street, Crow said, and I need you to secure that nightstand before anyone enters that room who isn't emergency medical. The officer's hand was already on his radio. Slade had not moved from the doorway. His face was proficient and contained and gave nothing away, and he was already doing his own calculus, the calculus of a man who had managed similar situations before and was deciding whether this one was still salvageable. He looked at Crow. Crow looked back. And Slade made the mistake that careful men sometimes made when they had been careful for so long that they forgot what it looked like when they stopped. He smiled, small, practiced, the professional smile, the one that said, "We'll see how this plays out." Crow did not smile back. Reed behind him had gone very still. He's going to disappear those files, Reed said, low, close to Crow's ear. If he's got access to the department system and he knows we've got the case number, the first thing he does is... Evelyn, Crow said. Evelyn already had her phone out. I'm calling the department director's emergency line. She said it to the room, to no one in particular, which meant she was saying it to Slade. I'm going to report that a caseworker made an unscheduled appearance at an active welfare call scene and that we have documentation indicating the original case closure may have been improper. I'll be sure to provide the case number. Slade's smile thinned. From outside, the ambulance siren opened up on the far edge of Harrowick, still minutes away but moving, the sound of the system working the way it was supposed to work when enough pieces were in the right place. Darren Pike appeared at the chapel doorway behind Slade, not entering, standing at the threshold. He was looking past Slade, past the officer, past Evelyn and Reed and Crow, directly at Lila. And Lila, 9 years old, cold, holding a paper crane that had been folded and refolded 15 times, sitting in a pew where her mother's phone call had just ended, because Boone had told her, I'm with her, she's okay. Looked back at her uncle with an expression that was not a child's expression. It was the expression of someone who had decided something. He knows, she said. He knows what's in those files. Yes, Crow said. He's been waiting to see if you'd actually open them. Yes? What happens now? Crow looked at Darren Pike in the doorway, at the smile that was the shape of warmth without the substance of it, at the patient, practiced stillness of a man who had managed rooms like this before and believed he could manage this one. And then Crow's phone rang again. Not Boone this time, not a local number. The area code was different, the area code of the county seat 2 hours north, where the district attorney's office was located. He stared at the screen. Ethan had written a letter to his attorney. The attorney, apparently, had read the letter. And sometime in the last 40 minutes, while Crow was standing in a cold chapel reading his dead son's handwriting, while a 9-year-old girl was talking to a dead man's grave, while Darren Pike stood next to his Jeep making confident phone calls, the attorney had made a phone call of his own. Crow answered. The voice on the other end said 3 words that changed everything that was about to happen. He lowered the phone. He looked at Darren Pike. And for the first time all night, the patient smile on Darren Pike's face flickered, just once. But Crow had been built for noticing. Lila, Crow said without looking away from the doorway, stay in this room. What is it? She said. Stay in this room, he said again, and he walked toward the door. The voice on the phone belonged to a man named Gerald Fitch, and he said 3 words that rearranged the geometry of the night. He kept records. Crow stood in the chapel doorway with Darren Pike 6 feet away, and the cold coming in around both of them, and the ambulance siren still building in the distance. And he said, What kind of records? The kind that take 2 years to compile. Fitch said. His voice was the careful voice of an attorney who had learned to speak in measured quantities. Your son began filing documentation with my office 14 months before he died. Not the school district file. Separate. Personal archive. He said he didn't trust the institutional system, and he wanted a secondary record in case the primary one disappeared. A pause. I've been holding it for 6 years, waiting for the right moment to hand it over. Your son was very specific about the conditions. What conditions? That I only release it to you, and only when the situation became active enough that it couldn't be walked back. Another pause, shorter. I think tonight qualifies. Darren Pike had not moved from the threshold. He was watching Crow's face with the concentrated attention of a man reading a situation through another man's reactions, and what he was seeing was making the practiced ease in his own posture shift by fractions, not breaking, not cracking, but recalibrating, the way a card player recalculates when someone at the table stops looking at their hand. What's in the records? Crow said. I haven't opened them. Your son asked me not to, but he told me one thing about what was in them. Fitch paused. He said Darren Pike was not a man with a drinking problem or a financial problem or an anger management problem. He said Darren Pike was a man with a system, and that Naomi Hartwell was not his first. Crow looked at Darren. Darren looked back. Fax me your address, Crow said. I'll have someone there in 40 minutes. He hung up and looked at Marcus, who had materialized at the edge of the chapel doorway without sound, which was something Marcus did. Take Reed, Crow said. County seat. Attorney named Gerald Fitch. He's going to give you a document package. You bring it back intact and you don't stop for anything. Marcus didn't ask questions. He touched Reed's shoulder once and they were moving. Darren watched them go. You're building a case, Darren said. His voice was still warm. That was the thing. The warmth was structural, not emotional. It didn't depend on his mood. I understand that. I want you to know I don't take this personally. You're a father who lost his son, and you're trying to find something to do with that. I understand the impulse. Go stand by your car, Crow said. I'm sorry? Your niece is in this building and you're not going inside it. Go stand by your car. Darren smiled. Patient. Tired, almost, in the way that competent people perform tiredness when they wanted you to feel unreasonable. The officer here will tell you I have every right to... Sir. The young officer had moved to Darren's left shoulder. He wasn't touching him, but he had positioned himself, and the position was not ambiguous. I'm going to need you to wait outside while we sort this out. Something moved behind Darren's eyes. Very fast. Gone before it fully formed. He looked at the officer with the expression of a man deciding whether the obstacle was temporary or permanent, and then he nodded once, graciously, and stepped back from the doorway and walked toward the jeep. Slade had already gone. Crow had not seen him leave. He had simply been present and then not present, which was its own kind of message. He called someone when Marcus and Reed left, Hendricks said. He was at Crow's elbow, had arrived the way Hendricks always arrived, without announcement, without drama, simply there when he was needed. Hendricks was the kind of man who could stand in a room for 20 minutes without being noticed and leave knowing everything that had been said. Watched him. He saw them get on the bikes and he was on the phone before they cleared the gate. He's telling someone the records are moving, Crow said. Yeah. Hendricks looked at the retreating figure by the jeep. Crow. The second vehicle Reed mentioned in his notes. I know that car. Crow looked at him. Late model Silverado, dark blue, partial plate that starts with 7-8. Hendricks' voice had gone very flat. It was parked on my street 2 weeks ago. Not Reed's street. Mine. The cold came in through the chapel doorway, and both men stood in it for a moment. Your street, Crow said. 2 houses down from mine, 3 nights in a row, gone by morning. Hendricks looked at his own hands briefly, then at the cemetery dark. I thought it was nothing. Construction crew from the remodel on the corner. I didn't pull the plate. Does Darren know where you live? I don't see how. Does he know your name? Hendricks was quiet for a 3 count. Reed's been prospecting 7 months. He's been at the chapter house. Anyone who knows the chapter house address can connect names to addresses if they know how to look. Crow turned back inside. Lila was still on the pew. Evelyn was on the phone again. The department director's line. leaving a message with the case number and Slade's name and the time and date, building a paper trail in real time. The young officer was in the far corner calling in the ambulance update, checking the address on Colton Street. The girl looked at Crow. She had the particular stillness of someone who had been listening through walls for a long time and was very good at it. "He knows who your people are," she said. "Looks that way. He does that. He finds out things about people." She turned the crane in her hands. "Before he moved in with us, he did something. He asked Mom about her friends. Just friendly questions. But then later when she'd try to call them, he'd say something about the friend. Something small, something accurate, something that made Mom feel like calling was like it would be awkward. He did it slowly, one friend at a time." She looked at the crane. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd stopped calling anyone. Crow sat down across from her. He was very tired. The tiredness was the kind that came from a long time of carrying something heavy. And tonight the weight had shifted, and the shift itself was exhausting, even if the load was no lighter. "How long has he been doing this?" he said. "Not just to you. Do you know?" "He had a wife," Lila said. "Before. He doesn't talk about her." She paused. "I heard him on the phone once, about 2 years ago. I don't think he knew I was in the hallway. He was talking to someone, and he said, 'Carol figured it out too late.' And then he laughed." She held Crow's gaze. Her name would have been Carol. The ambulance was closer now. A minute out. The cemetery road was starting to accumulate light and sound, the organized chaos of a response system doing its job, and through it all, by the Jeep, Darren Pike stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face turned toward the chapel and his phone in his hand, patient as weather. Crow's phone buzzed. Boone. "She's conscious," Boone said. "Coherent, weak. She wants to know about Lila." A pause. "Crow, the bottle on the nightstand. I didn't touch it, but I can see the color. It's a distinctive color. I've seen it before." Boone's voice tightened. "That's a sedative. Specific kind. Not over the counter, not a standard prescription. You can get it if you know the right people, and it metabolizes quietly, and in the short term, it looks like depression, like fatigue, like a woman who's having a hard time coping." Another pause, longer. "My sister has been a home health aide for 9 years. She recognized it through the bottle. She's seen it used before." "Used how?" Crow said. "Used to make someone compliant," Boone said. "Used to make someone easy to manage. Gradual dosing. Start small, build slow. Looks like nothing until the person can't get out of bed anymore." His voice had gone very controlled, the control of a man managing something with both hands. "Crow, this is not a domestic abuse case. This is not a coercive control case. This is a man who has done this before and who knows exactly what he's doing and has been doing it for long enough to get the dosing right." The chapel was very still around Crow. From the pew, Lila said, "Is she okay?" "She's going to be okay," Crow said, and he meant it in the immediate sense, the physical sense, and he kept the rest of it off his face because the rest of it was not for a 9-year-old to carry. He stepped outside. The cold hit him differently now. The October air with its cemetery smell, wet leaves, turned earth, the particular damp of stone, and beneath it something else now, something that had been there all night, and that he was only naming now. The smell of something that had been running a long time and had finally been cornered. Hendricks was outside, and Boone's sister had apparently arrived, a woman in scrubs named Deja Webb, Marcus's other sister rather than Boone's, because it turned out the Heroic network was a small and overlapping thing. And she was talking to the young officer with the focused calm of a medical professional who understood the weight of what she was reporting. Darren Pike watched all of it. And then his phone rang and he answered it and listened for approximately 15 seconds. And then he looked at Crow with the first expression of the night that wasn't warm. It wasn't hostile either. It was the expression of a man doing subtraction. He hung up. He walked to the Jeep. He opened the driver's door. "Stop him," Crow said. The officer was already moving, hand up, voice carrying the specific command authority of someone who had finally chosen a side. "Sir, I need you to stay." Darren closed the door. The Jeep's engine turned over. It didn't go forward. It didn't go backward. It idled, just idled, in the dark with its headlights off and Darren inside it, and for a moment Crow thought, rationally, coldly, that the man was calling the bluff, waiting to see what the response looked like, filing it away. Then the lights came on, and the Jeep moved, not fast, not panicked. The measured, deliberate exit of a man who understood that how he left was as important as where he was going. He pulled around the chapel's small lot, past the maintenance shed, toward the service road's north exit. Not the main gate where the ambulance was arriving, not the route past the officers. The service road. "Hendricks," Crow said. Hendricks was already on his bike. "Don't touch him," Crow said. "Follow. Distance. I need to know where he goes." The bike rumbled to life and pulled out after the Jeep's taillights, and Crow stood in the cemetery dark and watched them both go and understood something he didn't want to understand. The attorney had said he wasn't Naomi's first. Darren had made a call when Marcus and Reed left for the county seat, and now Darren was leaving without his niece, without his leverage, without the thing that had kept him in this cemetery for the past hour, which meant the records at Gerald Fitch's office were more important to him than Lila, which meant the records contained something more dangerous than what tonight had already produced. Crow went back inside and picked up Ethan's envelope from the pew where he'd left it and read the letter again. All of it this time. The margins, too. Ethan had been careful, surgical. He'd written dates and observations, and one line that Crow had passed over the first time because it hadn't had context yet. He was a caseworker before he moved to Harriwick, Millfield County, 2009 to 2014. "I think the Hartwell situation is not an experiment. I think it's a refinement." Crow read that line 3 times. Millfield County, 2009 to 2014. He pulled out his phone and searched the name and the county and the year range and found nothing on the first search, and then added the word Family Services and found a brief archived news item from a local Millfield paper dated 2013, a story about a county family services department under review following complaints about case closures. 1 paragraph. No names. Case closed, according to the follow-up item 6 months later, due to insufficient evidence. He searched Millfield County Family Services Victor Slade and found a staff directory from 2011 with Slade's name in it. He searched Millfield County Family Services Darren Pike and found nothing. He searched Millfield County 2014 Family Services resignation and found a single line in a board meeting minutes document, a redacted name, a resignation, effective immediately, no cause listed. His phone buzzed. Hendricks. "He went to the chapter house," Hendricks said. His voice was strange. Flat in a way Hendricks' voice didn't go flat. "Our chapter house," Crow said. "He went straight there. No wrong turns. He knew the address." "He's inside?" "No, he stopped outside. He sat in the Jeep for 3 minutes and then he drove away." A pause that contained something. "Crow. Someone already went through the place. The side door's open. The lock's been punched. The chapter house on Dellard Street. The place where the remnant of the Iron Shepherd chapter met, where the files were kept. Prospect applications, member records, the informal archive of a brotherhood that had tried to keep itself organized through the years of attrition and loss. Reed's prospect file, Hendricks's address, Marcus's information, all of it. "How long has the door been open?" Crow said. "Can't tell. No one's been there since Tuesday," which meant it could have been done any time in the last 3 days, which meant Darren had not made this move tonight. He had made it before tonight, before the cemetery, before Lila came in from the rain, before any of this became visible. He had been prepared. "Secure the building," Crow said. "Don't go in alone. Wait for me." He came back into the chapel. Evelyn had finished her calls and was writing something in a small notebook. Details, times, names, the physical record of a woman who understood that testimony required specificity. The young officer was outside coordinating the ambulance arrival. Lila was alone in the pew. She was looking at the crane in her hands. She had unfolded it, just partially. One fold opened, the way you open something when you need to see what's inside without fully dismantling it. She was looking at the paper itself, not the shape. "He wrote on it," she said, not surprised, as if she'd suspected. "Ethan, when he gave it to me, he folded something into it and I didn't know until... Oh, why I opened it now." Crow crossed the room. She tilted the partially opened crane so he could see. Inside the fold, in pencil, very small, the letters nearly worn away from the years of refolding. "If you ever need to show someone what he is, the name Carol Vines. Millfield County, 2014. She'll remember. Crow sat down. His hands were on his knees and he looked at the floor of the chapel, the worn wooden boards, the places where generations of boots had polished the grain smooth, and he breathed once, very deliberately. Ethan had known this for years, had known the name, had folded it into a paper crane and given it to a 9-year-old girl as insurance, as a message in a bottle, as the specific kind of contingency plan that a careful and frightened man makes when he doesn't know who to trust, but he trusts the child. He knew, Lila said. He knew what Darren was. Yes. Why didn't he? She stopped herself. She knew why. The same reason the report got closed. The same reason Slade arrived before the welfare check. The same reason a chapter house got searched 3 days ago. Because a man with a system didn't leave exposure points. He managed them. Your mom is going to be okay, Crow said. He said it directly, without softening. The ambulance is there. Boone is with her. She called you tonight, which means she's fighting it. Whatever he gave her, she's fighting it. She always fights things, Lila said. She just fights them quietly. She carefully refolded the crane, fingers precise, following the old creases. That's why he picked her. Ethan said once that Darren, he didn't say it directly, but I understood what he meant. He said some people looked for partners who had already been taught that their feelings were inconvenient. Crow looked at her. Mom used to apologize for crying, Lila said, before Darren. She did it with me. She'd cry and then say sorry, like crying was something she was imposing on me. She pressed the last fold flat. Ethan said that was something someone had taught her. He said it wasn't her fault she'd learned it. The crane was whole again. She placed it in her lap. Darren looked for women who already knew how to disappear, she said, and then he helped them disappear faster. Crow stood. He looked at Evelyn. Stay with her. Evelyn nodded. Where are you going? Lila said. To make sure the records get here safe. What records? The ones my son spent 2 years building, Crow said, so that a night like tonight could happen. He went outside. The ambulance had gone, en route to Colton Street, to Naomi, to the amber bottle with no label. The young officer was on his radio at the cemetery gate, building his own record of the night's sequence of events, and his voice had the slightly altered tone of someone who had updated their understanding of a situation and was now updating their report to match. Darren's Jeep was gone. Slade's sedan was gone. The cemetery had returned to its proper state, quiet, cold, the October dark sitting on the headstones with the specific patience of things that did not need to hurry. Crow walked to Ethan's grave. He hadn't done this yet. He'd been in the cemetery for hours and hadn't gone to the stone. He stood in front of it. Ethan James Vance. The dates. The simple line beneath them that Crow had chosen in the first weeks of grief when choosing anything had required enormous effort. He made people feel less alone. The paper crane Lila had left at the base was still there. Wet from the earlier rain, slightly collapsed on one side but intact. Holding its shape. Whatever problem she'd folded into it the 14th time before she unfolded it and refolded it with the name inside. Crow crouched down. He didn't touch the crane. You planned all of this, he said. His voice was very quiet, addressed to the stone, to the name, to whatever it was that people addressed when they needed the dead to hear something. You knew I'd be here on a Friday. You knew she'd come eventually. You set it up so that when she came, everything would be here. The envelope, the files, Fitch. He paused. You sent her to me. The wind moved the dry leaves. You trusted me with this, Crow said. After everything. He stopped. His jaw was very tight. I'm going to do right by it. He stood, turned. His phone buzzed. Marcus. We've got a problem. Tell me. We're 20 minutes from Fitch's office. Reed's bike just blew a rear tire on the interstate. We pulled over. I've got the documents. Fitch released them when I called ahead. But Reed's down and his ankle is... A sound in the background. The flat thump of a large man sitting down hard on asphalt. He came down on the right side. He's up, he's conscious, but he can't ride. How bad? Bad enough he shouldn't ride. He wants to. I'm telling you because he'll do what I say, but he'll do it resentful, and I'd rather you... He stays with the bike, Crow said. You bring the documents. I'll send someone for Reed. Who? Crow looked at the cemetery, at the darkness, at Hendricks, pulling in now at the service road entrance with his headlight cutting across the tombstones. "Hendricks," he said, "change of plan. I need you to—" "Crow!" Hendricks' voice over the phone, cutting through. He had just gotten off his bike at the service road entrance, and he was looking at something. "There's a car parked on the access road behind the north wall. Been here a while. Not a cop. Not county. Dark Silverado. Partial plate starts 7-8. The car from Hendricks Street, the car that had been outside for 3 nights 2 weeks ago. Here. Now. Not moving." Crow looked at the chapel where Evelyn and Lila were. At the chapel's small window with the amber lamplight inside it. At the east wall of the cemetery, 20 yards from the chapel. The car had been here before Crow arrived. Before the ambulance. Before Darren left. "How long?" Crow said. "Can't tell," Hendricks said. "But the hood's cold. It's been here a while." A pause. "Crow, someone's in it." "One person?" "Two." The night pressed down. The leaves moved. Somewhere on Colton Street, Naomi Hartwell was being loaded into an ambulance, and somewhere on an interstate shoulder, Reed Caulfield was sitting on the asphalt with a ruined ankle and a paper crane's worth of evidence in Marcus Webb's jacket. And inside a small warm chapel, a 9-year-old girl was refolding a problem into a shape she could hold. And 2 men Crow didn't know were sitting in a cold Silverado on the access road, and they had been there long enough for the engine to go cold. Crow walked back to the chapel. He opened the door. Evelyn looked up. Lila looked up. "We need to move," he said. "Right now." "Where?" Evelyn said. "Away from the windows." He came inside and pulled the door closed and looked at the chapel's interior. The 2 small windows, east and west, the single door, the wooden walls that would stop weather, but nothing harder than weather, the heater in the corner, the pews, the cabinet. "There are 2 men in a vehicle on the access road behind the north wall," he said. He said it to Evelyn, calmly, the way you said things when panic would cost you something. "They've been there a while." "Darren's people," Evelyn said. "Most likely." "He left us here," Lila said. Her voice was flat. "He left because he knew they were already here." Crow looked at her. She was right. He had worked the math already. Darren had left without his niece because he didn't need to physically take her. He had people in position. He'd been building this since before tonight. He had the chapter house address. He'd searched the place 3 days ago. He'd had someone watching. Crow had brought Lila into the chapel thinking the chapel was shelter. The chapel was a box. He pulled his phone and called Boone. 2 rings. "How close are you to being done at Colton Street?" "Ambulance just left. I'm here with the officer waiting for—" "I need you at Harrowick Municipal Cemetery, North Access Road. Now." "How bad?" "Unknown. Come fast." He hung up. He looked at Evelyn. "You have keys to the maintenance shed?" "Yes." "Which way is it from here?" "West. 50 yards. "Is there a second exit from the shed?" "There's a loading door on the south wall. Comes out near the old section." Crow looked at Lila. She was standing. She had the crane in her left hand, and she had picked up the document envelope in her right, the one with Ethan's files, HW4, Hartwell. And she was holding it against her chest the way someone held something they had decided they were not going to put down. "Can you run?" Crow said. "Yes," she said. "How far?" "As far as I need to." He believed her. He looked at the east window. No movement. At the door. At Evelyn. "The officer's at the gate," Evelyn said. "If I go to him—" "If you go to the gate, they'll see you cross the open ground," Crow said. "And I don't know which side that Silverado came on." He thought. Fast, clean, the combat arithmetic he'd learned in a Delta 30 years ago and had never fully unlearned. "You take the girl, maintenance shed, loading door. I'll come around the south side and meet you." "And you?" Evelyn said. "I'm going to the north wall." "Crow, I need to see who we're dealing with." He said it simply. "I need to know if this is 2 men or a phone call's worth of men. That changes what we do next." Evelyn looked at him with the expression of a woman who had spent 22 years in crisis situations and understood exactly the difference between recklessness and necessary intelligence. She did not argue. 3 minutes, she said. "If you're not at the loading door in 3 minutes, I'll be there." He looked at Lila. She was looking back at him. "Ethan was right," she said. "You're a little bit scary." "Yeah," he said. But you're safe, she said. He nodded once. Then he said, Go. Evelyn took the girl's hand and they went out the chapel door and turned west into the dark cemetery, two shapes moving between headstones, and Crow watched them for 5 seconds. Evelyn navigating by instinct, Lila keeping pace, the document envelope held against her chest. And then he turned east. The north wall was 100 yards. He covered it in under a minute, staying low, using the headstone rows as cover the way he'd used terrain cover in places that smelled nothing like Pennsylvania in October and that had never fully left his body's memory. His right leg dragged slightly on the uneven ground, the old steel making itself known, and he ignored it with the practiced efficiency of a man who had made a lifetime of ignoring it. The Silverado was parked on the access road with its nose pointing toward the cemetery's east gate. Two shapes inside, driver and passenger, lit intermittently by the screen glow of a phone. The passenger was on the phone. The driver was watching the chapel, which from this angle was visible across the cemetery as a small lit rectangle. Crow crouched behind the north wall, stone under his hands, cold and damp. He looked at the car for 60 seconds, cataloging. The driver was large, the passenger smaller, animated, the body language of someone receiving instructions rather than giving them. The rear seats were empty. The truck bed was empty. 2 men. Not more. Not yet. The passenger ended the call and said something to the driver, and the driver nodded, and the Silverado's engine turned over. Not moving yet. Just running. Ready. Crow's phone buzzed. Marcus. I'm 20 minutes out, Marcus said. Documents in hand. Reed's staying with his bike. You need me to come faster. I can come faster. I need you to come now, Crow said. What happened? Darren sent people to babysit the chapel. 2 of them. They just started their engine. A beat. You want me there before they move. I want you there before they move. He paused. And Marcus, when you get here, come in from the south. Service road off Meridian. Not the main gate. Understood. And call Boone. Tell him the same. Done. He hung up. He looked at the chapel window, still lit, still amber, because Evelyn and Lila hadn't turned off the lamps when they left. Good instinct. Make the chapel look occupied. Give the Silverado something to watch while the real situation moved. He moved back towards the west at a low run. 40 yards. 60. The maintenance shed was a dark shape ahead, corrugated metal walls, the smell of motor oil and fertilizer and old metal. And around the south corner, the loading door was ajar, and Evelyn's white hair was visible in the narrow gap of it. He came through. Inside, tractor parts, fertilizer bags stacked 6 high, a riding mower, a workbench with hand tools, a single bulb on a pull chain that Evelyn had not pulled, the loading door behind him, the service road 50 feet beyond it. Dark, quiet. Lila was sitting on a fertilizer bag. She still had the crane, she still had the envelope. She looked at him when he came in. 2 men, he said, engine running, waiting to see movement. What are they going to do? She said. I don't know yet, he said, which was true and which was the most frightening answer he could have given, and she received it without flinching. Outside, on the far side of the cemetery, the sound of the Silverado's engine changed. Not moving, not yet, but revving slightly, the sound of an engine getting ready, and then a second sound overlaid it. A motorcycle, coming fast from the south, the low growl of Marcus's bike opening up on Meridian, and then a second engine behind it. Boone, coming up from Colton Street, the 2 of them converging. The Silverado went quiet, waiting. In the darkness of the maintenance shed, with the smell of oil and cold earth around them, and a 9-year-old girl on a fertilizer bag holding a paper crane and a dead man's files, Crow's phone lit up with a text from a number he didn't recognize. 3 words. You found everything. A pause. The screen glowed in the dark shed. Crow stared at it. Then a second text. Same number. Almost. The cold in the shed was the kind that didn't come from the weather. Because Ethan had spent 2 years building a record. Fitch had held it for 6 years. And Darren had known about Fitch. Had known, probably, since before Ethan died. And had not moved on it. Had waited. Had been patient. The way he was always patient. The way a man waited when he was confident that time worked in his favor. Almost. Crow looked at the envelope in Lila's hands. HW4, Hartwell. Everything Ethan had filed, everything Fitch was bringing, everything Reed had noted in his cramped handwriting over 6 weeks of watching a house. Almost. He looked at Evelyn. Ethan's cabinet, he said. There are other envelopes in it. Yes, she said. How many? 11, 12. I didn't count. Each one is a family. He looked at his phone, at the 2 texts, at the dark of the shed around them. Each one is a case that Darren managed. Each one is a woman and a situation and a report that probably got closed by someone named Slade, or someone who worked the same way Slade worked. Evelyn understood it the same moment he did. He could see it arrive in her face. The sequence of understanding, first the fact of it, and then the scale of it, and then the weight of the scale. He didn't come to Harrowick for Naomi, Crow said. He came because Slade was here, because the infrastructure was here. The closed cases, the managed reports, the county system with a man inside it who knew how to make things disappear. He paused. This isn't one family. No, Evelyn said. Ethan knew, Lila said from the fertilizer bag. Both adults looked at her. That's what the number 4 means, she said, holding up the envelope. HW4, Hartwell. Number 4. Her voice was very steady. We weren't the first family he practiced on. In the dark shed with the motorcycles pulling into position outside and the Silverado sitting quiet beyond the cemetery wall and the October cold working its way through every gap in the corrugated metal walls, the full shape of the thing finally had enough light on it to see. Darren Pike had been operating for years. Through multiple counties, through a network of caseworkers and closed files and managed exits. He had refined it, Ethan's word refinement, until it ran the way a machine ran, with interchangeable parts and contingency protocols, and the particular smooth efficiency of a man who had learned from every mistake he'd ever made. And the records that Marcus was bringing down the Meridian Service Road right now, those records were not just Naomi Hartwell's story. They were the story of every family before her, and they were enough to burn the whole machine down, which was exactly why the Silverado was still sitting outside the cemetery wall, and exactly why the text said, almost. Crow's hand tightened on his phone. Outside, Marcus's headlight swept across the loading door. And inside the shed, Lila Hartwell unfolded the paper crane for the 16th time, smoothed the paper flat against her knee, and began. Marcus came through the loading door with the document package inside his jacket, pressed flat against his chest the way you carried something that couldn't get wet and couldn't get lost. And he was breathing hard from the ride, and his eyes were doing the immediate threat. Assessment sweep that 15 years of running into burning buildings had built into him as reflex. Door, windows, corners, people. He found Crow. He found Evelyn. He found Lila on the fertilizer bag with the unfolded crane flat on her knee and a look on her face that was not a child's look. Silverado moved, Marcus said. Pulled around to the South Access Road when I came in. They know where we are. How long? Crow said. 3 minutes? Maybe less. Crow took the document package from Marcus's jacket. Thick, rubber-banded, Ethan's handwriting on the outer folder. Not his name, not a label, just a date. The date was 8 months before he died. Boone's at the main gate, Marcus said. Officers still there. 2 more cruisers pulled up while I was coming in. Somebody called for backup. I don't know who. Slade, Evelyn said. He'll have called it in as a disturbance, bikers refusing to release a minor. Which means the next officers through that gate come in with a specific picture already painted, Marcus said. His jaw was very tight. Crow, we hand that package to the wrong person tonight and it disappears. You understand that? I understand. So who's the right person? Crow looked at the package. At Ethan's date on the outer folder. At the shed walls and the cold in the 3 minutes Marcus had given them. He looked at Lila, who had stopped smoothing the crane flat, and was watching him with those dark, old, patient eyes. Her, he said. Marcus looked at the girl. She's the protected party, Crow said. She's 9 years old, and she came to a cemetery alone in October rain, and she's been carrying pieces of this for years without knowing what she was carrying. If she walks out of this shed holding those documents, they belong to her. And anyone who takes them from her has to explain to every camera, every responding officer, every county official why they took evidence from a child. He paused. Darren managed adults. He managed systems. He managed professionals. He looked at Lila. He didn't plan for her to walk into the middle of this herself. Lila held out her hand. Crow put the package in it. She held it the same way she'd been holding the envelope all night, against her chest, both arms around it, the crane balanced on top. The loading door shook. Not a knock. Something heavier. The flat palm impact of someone establishing presence rather than requesting entry. Marcus moved left. Crow moved to the door. "Who's there?" Crow said. "Herwick PD." The voice was young, tight, the voice of an officer who had been briefed on the way to the scene and was working from that briefing. "I need everyone to come out, now." "How many of you?" Crow said. A pause. "Sir, come out of the building." "How many officers are at this location?" Another pause. Longer. The pause of someone checking with someone else. "Sir, I have a 9-year-old child in here and 2 men in a dark Silverado who have been following her across this cemetery for the past 40 minutes, Crow said. "Before I open this door, I want to know how many officers are on the South Access Road and whether any of them arrived with a county caseworker named Victor Slade." Silence outside. The specific silence of a radio being keyed. Marcus had his phone out. Texting Boone, Crow could see the movement in his peripheral vision, the fast thumb work of a man coordinating without speaking. Then a different voice outside. Older. The weight of rank in it. "Mr. Vance?" Crow went still. "My name is Captain Doris Okafor," the voice said. "Herwick PD. I've been on the phone with the Millfield County District Attorney for the past 11 minutes. I know what you have in there. I know who the child is. Open the door." Crow looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at him. "Millfield," Marcus said, very quiet. Crow opened the door. Captain Okafor was 50, built solid, with a face that had made a long career of receiving difficult information without reacting to it. She looked at Crow. She looked past him at Marcus and Evelyn and the girl with the document package against her chest. She looked at the crane on top of it. Behind her were 2 officers. No Slade, no gray jacket, no department lanyard, just cops, cold, standing in the October dark at the south end of a cemetery at 11 at night. "The Silverado," Crow said. "Detained," Okafor said. "Both men. Boone, your man at the main gate, got a plate and called it in. Vehicle is registered to a Herwick address that comes back to a Shell LLC. The men have priors in Millfield County." She held his gaze. "This is bigger than tonight, Mr. Vance. The DA's office has been building toward this for 14 months, and they needed someone to open the door." "Ethan opened it," Crow said, 6 years ago. Okafor looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "He did." Lila walked forward. She came from behind Crow, and she walked up to Captain Okafor, and she held out the document package with both hands, the crane still balanced on top of it, and she said, "My name is Lila Hartwell. My mother is Naomi Hartwell, and she's at Herwick General right now. This belonged to Ethan Vance. He built it so that when someone finally looked, there'd be something to see." Okafor took the package with both hands. She looked at the girl. "How old are you?" Okafor said. 9, Lila said. Okafor's face did something brief and controlled. She looked at Crow over the girl's head, and Crow saw in that look the specific thing that passed between adults who had just watched a child carry something no child should have had to carry, and who were trying to figure out what language was adequate to that fact. There was no adequate language, so neither of them spoke. The radio on Okafor's shoulder crackled. The voice on it said one name. Darren Pike. "Detained," it said. "Traffic stop on Route 9, 3 miles east. Outstanding warrant just issued from Millfield County." The name Carol Vines had been reached by phone 40 minutes ago and had provided a statement that had been enough for a judge to sign the warrant at 11:15 on a Friday night in October. Crow heard it, the name from the crane. The name Ethan had folded into the paper and given to a little girl as the last line of insurance. Carol Vines, Millfield County, 2014. She'll remember. She had remembered. The radio went quiet. The cemetery settled around them. The headstones and the oak trees and the cold and the particular silence of a place that held things people needed somewhere to put. The loading door swung slightly in the wind. The Harley engines had gone quiet. Somewhere on the main road, a cruiser's lights were still cycling, red and blue painting slow arcs across the cemetery wall. Crow looked at his hands. Lila picked up the crane from where it had been resting on top of the document package. She held it carefully, both hands, thumbs along the wings, and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at Crow. "Is it over?" she said. He wanted to say yes. The wanting was enormous and specific, and it was the wanting of a man who had been a father and who understood what a child needed to hear at the end of a night like this. But he was also a man who had spent 30 years learning that the truth had more endurance than comfort, and that children who had been given false comfort grew into adults who couldn't recognize real safety when they found it. "The worst of it," he said, "the worst of it is over." She looked at him for a moment, processing, accepting, the contained, exhausted acceptance of someone who had been braced for a long time and was only now beginning, carefully, partially, to let the brace loosen. "Okay," she said. Outside, the engines were starting again. Not urgent, not the sound of men responding to danger. The sound of men who had held a perimeter and were now, slowly, standing down. Marcus moved past Crow to the door and looked out, and the look on his face was the look of a man confirming what he already knew. Boone's headlight at the main gate. Hendricks coming around from the east, slow, the bike barely above idle. The Silverado gone. The cemetery returning to itself. Okafor had moved away, the document package under her arm, talking into her radio in the low, urgent shorthand of a senior officer managing multiple simultaneous developments. Evelyn came to stand beside Crow. She was holding her small notebook, and she looked very tired, the tiredness of a woman who had been running on professional discipline for hours and was now allowing herself to feel the weight of it. "He documented families," she said. Quiet. Just a Crow. 11 envelopes in that cabinet. "I know. Those families have been waiting 6 years. "They've been waiting longer than that," Crow said. She was quiet for a moment. "What do you do now?" He looked at Lila. She was still holding the crane. She had drifted slightly toward the loading door and was looking out at the cemetery. The headstones, the oak trees, the thin frost beginning on the grass, the particular dark blue of the sky before midnight in October. Her back was to the adults. Her shoulders were down. She was looking at the direction of Ethan's grave. "I keep a promise," Crow said. His phone buzzed. "Boone, Naomi is stable. Asking for Lila." He crossed the shed in 4 steps. "Lila." She turned. He held up the phone so she could read the screen. The sound she made was not a word. It was the sound underneath words. The sound a person made when something they had been holding their breath about for a very long time. She made the sound underneath words, and then she crossed the shed in 4 fast steps and pressed her face against Crow's arm. Not hugging him, not the performed embrace of a child seeking comfort, but the specific animal contact of a person whose body had finally received permission to stop bracing and needed to put that permission somewhere real and solid. She was there for 3 seconds. Then she stepped back and wiped her face with the back of her hand, one clean motion, and said, "Can we go to her?" "Yes," Crow said. "Right now." They went. Evelyn rode with Lila in Okafor's cruiser, Crow's suggestion, because a cruiser was faster than a bike and warmer, and because Okafor understood the shape of the night well enough to agree without discussion. Crow rode behind them on the Harley, and Marcus rode behind him, and Boone fell in from the hospital side as they turned onto Meridian, and for the 4 minutes it took to reach Heroic General, the 3 bikes moved through the empty October streets in loose formation. Not fast, not theatrical, just present. The low sustained rumble of engines that had been running all night and had not stopped. The hospital's emergency bay was lit in the particular fluorescent white that made everything look clinical and temporary. Boone was at the entrance when they arrived, still in his cut, hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at Crow as they pulled up with the look of a man who had been alone with something difficult for 2 hours and was relieved to hand it to more people. "She's on the 3rd floor," Boone said. "Stays stabilized. They ran a tox panel. The sedative compound is documented now. Lab is holding samples." He paused. "She's been asking for Lila since she got here." Lila was already through the doors. Crow stood at the entrance and watched her go. The small figure in the dark coat moving through the fluorescent light. The document envelope gone now, in Okafor's hands, in the chain of custody that Ethan had planned toward for 2 years. The paper crane was still with her. She'd kept it in her left hand the whole ride. "Go," Marcus said, beside him. "I'm not family," Crow said. "You're close enough," Marcus said. He went in. The third floor had the particular quiet of a hospital at midnight, the low tone of monitors, the soft shoes of night staff, the occasional distant announcement that meant nothing to anyone not waiting for something specific. Room 317 was at the end of the corridor, and through the small window in the door, Crow could see the shape of a woman in the bed, slight, pale, her hair across the pillow in the flat, exhausted way of someone who had been horizontal for days. And beside her, leaning over the bed rail with both arms on it and her forehead almost touching her mother's shoulder, Lila. He stopped outside the door. He could hear Lila's voice through the gap. Not the words, just the tone. Low, steady, the same tone she'd used all night when she was being careful. And under it, weaker, a woman's voice answering. Short sentences, the effort of them audible even through the door. Crow stood in the corridor and let them have the room. He leaned against the wall. He was very tired. The tiredness was complete now, bone deep, the accumulated weight of 6 years of Friday cemetery visits and the particular additional weight of this night pressing down on all of it. His right leg ached from the run across the cemetery. The old scar along his jaw was tight from the cold. He pulled Ethan's letter from his jacket pocket. The handwritten one. His name on the envelope in his son's backwards E handwriting. He had read it 3 times already, but he read it again now, in the fluorescent corridor with the monitor tones and the soft shoes, and the sound of a woman's voice from room 317 slowly getting stronger. The letter was 3 pages. Most of it was practical. Names, dates, the attorney's contact, the instructions for the cabinet. But the last paragraph was not practical. The last paragraph was the thing Ethan had clearly written and then set down and then come back to, because the handwriting changed slightly in the last 8 lines. The letter's more deliberate, like he'd been thinking about each word before he committed it. "I know you've spent 6 years thinking I died disappointed. I need you to know that's wrong. I died knowing you would show up when someone needed you to. I planned for it. I trusted it the way I trusted gravity. Whatever happened between us, and I know it was real, and it cost us both. It didn't change what I knew about who you are in the places that matter. You are the safest, dangerous man I've ever known. I need you to be that for them, for as long as they need it. That's not a burden. It's a gift. I'm giving you a reason to stay in the world. Please take it." Crow folded the letter. He stood in the corridor for another minute and breathed. Then the door to room 317 opened, and Lila looked out at him with her dark eyes and said, "She wants to meet you." Naomi Hartwell was 34 years old and looked like someone who had been through a fire that didn't leave burns. Hollowed slightly, the edges of her showing through the fatigue in a way that suggested, underneath the damage, a woman of considerable specific strength. Her eyes were Lila's eyes, the same dark brown, the same quality of attention. Her hands on the blanket were thin, the IV taped to the back of her left hand. She looked at Crow when he came in. She took him in the way Lila had taken him in at the cemetery. The scar, the cut, the size of him, the face. She didn't flinch. "You're Ethan's father," she said. Her voice was rough from dehydration, but the tone was clear. "Yes, ma'am." "He talked about you." She paused to breathe. "He said you were the reason he understood that people could be more than what happened to them." Another breath. "He said you were the proof." Crow said nothing. There wasn't language for what that did to him, so he didn't reach for any. "Thank you," Naomi said, "for staying." "I didn't do anything your daughter hadn't already started," he said. Naomi looked at Lila beside her. Something passed between them. The specific communication of a mother and child who had been each other's primary company through a long siege, the look of 2 people confirming that the other one was still there. "She found you," Naomi said. "She found me," Crow agreed, "or Ethan found me. Hard to tell the difference." Naomi's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, too tired for a smile, but the shape that preceded one. The shape of a person remembering what smiling felt like. "Get some rest," Crow said. "We'll be here." He meant it in the immediate sense. He and Marcus and Boone in the corridor, the Iron Shepherd remnant doing what it did, holding the perimeter while the people inside it recovered. But he meant it in the longer sense too, and Naomi heard both meanings, and she closed her eyes with the exhale of someone finally putting down a weight they had been carrying alone for 2 years. Lila walked out into the corridor with Crow. She stood beside him against the wall, shoulder about level with his elbow, and they stood there in the hospital quiet for a minute without talking. "What happens to the other families?" she said. "The 11 envelopes." "Okafor's people will work through them," Crow said. "With the DA's office. It takes time, but the records are there." Ethan made sure of that. "Will they believe it? After so long?" "Carol Vines believed it," he said. "She waited 6 years to tell someone. When someone finally asked, she was ready." He paused. "People who've been through something like this, they don't forget. They just wait for the room to be safe enough to say it out loud." Lila thought about this. She was turning the crane in her hands again, not the anxious turning of the cemetery, something slower, more deliberate. "Victor Slade," she said. "His employment is suspended pending investigation," Crow said. "That happened about an hour ago. Okafor called it." "Will that stick?" "Between the records and Carol Vines and the tox panel on your mom and 2 detained men whose vehicle links back to a network that crosses 3 counties?" He looked at her. "Yeah, it'll stick." She nodded. Once, the nod of someone crossing an item off a list they've been keeping internally for a long time. Then she held the crane out to him. "Make one," she said. He looked at it. "I don't know how." "I'll teach you." She unfolded it fully, all the way this time, completely open, the paper just a flat square in her palm with the ghost of all its fold lines still visible, every crease from every version it had been. "You just need something to put in it." He thought about what Ethan had written. "I'm giving you a reason to stay in the world." "I know what to put in it," he said. She taught him slowly, step by step, talking him through each fold with the patient precision of someone who had learned this from someone who loved them. His hands were wrong for it, too large, the knuckles stiffened from the cold and the years. But he followed her instructions, and she corrected him twice without impatience, and on the 3rd attempt the shape came together, imperfect, slightly lopsided on the left wing, but recognizably a crane. He held it. "What did you put in it?" she said. 6 years of going to that grave alone," he said, "and tonight, and everything after." She looked at the crane in his hands. She seemed satisfied with this. Boone appeared at the end of the corridor with 2 paper cups of coffee from the vending alcove and held one out to Crow without a word. The coffee was bad, the specific institutional bad of hospital vending coffee, at 1 in the morning, and Crow drank half of it standing in the corridor, and it was the best thing he'd tasted all night. Marcus came up from the lobby at 1:15 with the news that Gerald Fitch had arrived at the precinct personally, documents verified and logged, and that the Millfield County DA had an assistant on the road to Heroic with a subpoena package. The machine was moving. The thing Ethan had built, the careful 2-year architecture of names and dates and documented observations, was inside the system now, and the system was, slowly, ungracefully, doing what it was supposed to do. At 2 in the morning, Naomi Hartwell was moved to a recovery room. At 2:15, Lila fell asleep in a chair beside her mother's bed, the crane in her loose hand, her coat still on. Crow sat in the corridor outside their room. Marcus sat across from him. Hendricks had arrived sometime in the last hour and was standing at the corridor's end, looking out the window at the Heroic night. The streetlights, the empty parking lot, the distant hills going dark against a sky that was beginning, very slightly, at its eastern edge, to think about morning. Reed had arrived at 2:30, walking on a taped ankle with the stubborn, slightly green expression of a man who had decided pain was not a sufficient reason to be absent. He sat beside Crow without speaking, and Crow looked at the bruise on his cheekbone, 4 days old now, the yellow-green of healing, and said, "You did good work." Reed looked at his hands. 6 weeks and I didn't crack it." "No. But you built the foundation that let tonight crack it." Crow looked at him. "That's how most of this works. You don't always see the thing you're building toward. You just keep building." Reed was quiet for a moment. "Is this what it's always like? The Iron Shepherd thing?" Crow thought about that. "No," he said. "Sometimes it's paperwork. Sometimes it's driving someone to a food bank at 6 in the morning. Sometimes it's nothing for 3 months, and then a night like this." He paused. But the work's the same. You show up. You stay. You don't leave people in the cold if you can help it. Reed looked at the door to room 317. I want to patch in, Reed said. For real. Not a prospect patch. You've got 6 more months, Crow said. I know. Then you've got 6 more months. Reed almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough. At 3:40 in the morning, Crow walked out of Harwick General into the October cold. The parking lot was quiet. His bike was where he'd left it, beside Marcus's, beside Boone's, beside Hendricks's. 4 machines in a loose row that looked like what they were. The evidence of men who had stayed. He stood beside the Harley and looked at the sky. The eastern edge had gone from black to the specific dark blue that meant the night was making its decision. An hour until dawn, maybe less. His phone had a message from Captain Okafor, sent at 3:15. Darren Pike, Millfield County. Charges filed tonight include false imprisonment, unlawful administration of a controlled substance, and coercive control under the expanded statute. 3 additional complainants from Millfield have made contact with the DA's office in the last 2 hours. The warrant is solid. He won't be walking this one back. Crow read it twice. Put the phone in his pocket. He thought about Ethan at 26, 2 years into his job, sitting in a kitchen with a frightened woman and a child who noticed everything, writing things down in the careful, methodical way of a man who believed that documentation was a form of protection. He thought about the envelopes in the cabinet, 11 other families, 11 other names in black marker, 11 other situations that Ethan had cataloged and filed and sealed and left in the care of a woman named Evelyn who kept a thermos of coffee in a chapel and left the door unlocked from October through March. He thought about a paper crane folded and refolded 15 times, carrying a problem that kept changing shape. He thought about what his son had written, "You are the safest dangerous man I've ever known." He straddled the bike. Sat there without starting it. Marcus came out of the hospital entrance, coffee in hand, and stood beside his own bike and looked at the sky the same way Crow had been looking at it. "What do we do with the chapter house?" Marcus said. "The lock's punched. The place needs work anyway." "Fix it," Crow said, "and open it up." Marcus looked at him. "Evelyn knows 11 families," Crow said. "Each one of those envelopes has a name in it. Each one of those families has been waiting 6 years for someone to tell them it wasn't their fault and it wasn't over, and there are people who will show up." He looked at the eastern sky. "We open it up. We run it the way Ethan ran the counseling. Food drives that aren't called food drives. Transportation, school supplies, emergency contact. You need someone. You call. Someone comes." He paused. "No gangster business. No drama. Just people who don't leave." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Deja's been talking about doing something like that for 2 years, he said. His sister, the home health aide, who'd recognized the medication bottle. "She's got contacts at 3 clinics. "Good," Crow said. "Start there." Marcus turned his coffee cup in his hands. "This is going to be a lot of work." "Yes," Crow said. "We're not young." "No. Boone's knee is shot. Hendricks can't lift anything over 40 pounds since his back. Reed's going to be on that ankle for 3 weeks. Marcus looked at him. "You've got a piece of shrapnel in your leg that's been there since 1972. "I know where it is," Crow said. Marcus looked at the hospital entrance. At the door Lila had gone through, at the light coming from the 3rd-floor windows. "All right," he said. He took a last drink of the bad coffee and dropped the cup in the can by the entrance. "All right." He started his bike. Boone came out of the entrance and started his. Hendricks came last, pulling his jacket collar up against the cold, and stood beside his bike for a moment looking at Crow. "You going back to the cemetery first?" Hendricks said. "Yeah," Crow said. Hendricks nodded. No further comment. He understood. All of them understood. Had understood for 6 years, every Friday, the thing Crow was doing when he took the service road in after dark. The 3 bikes left the hospital parking lot, and their tail lights faded down the empty Harwick street, and the sound of the engines went with them, diminishing until the parking lot was quiet enough to hear the birds starting somewhere in the distance. Not dawn yet, but the birds knew it was coming. Crow started the Harley. He drove back to the cemetery alone. He went in through the service road, the way he always came. And he parked beside the oak tree and walked the familiar 4 minutes in the growing pre-dawn light, past the older stones, past the veterans, past the children's section with the stuffed rabbit on the small grave. He walked without rushing. Ethan's headstone was the way it always was. The carved letters, the dates, the line underneath. He made people feel less alone. The frost on the grass around it had not fully melted. The paper crane Lila had left was still at the base, wet and slightly collapsed, but still holding its shape against the cold stone. Crow crouched down. He placed the crane he had made, lopsided, imperfect, the left wing slightly short, beside hers. The two cranes at the base of the stone. Hers worn and refolded and carrying 15 versions of a problem that had finally been given to the right people. His new, clumsy, carrying 6 years of a grief that was not finished but was, for the first time, mixed with something else. He stayed crouched there for a moment. His right knee ached. The old steel in his leg reminded him it was there. "I hear you," he said to the stone, to his son's name in the growing light. "I hear what you were trying to tell me." He paused. "I'm going to do right by it. All of it. The families, the girl, her mother. I'm going to build the thing you couldn't build because you ran out of time." He stopped. His voice had gone to the edge of something. He let it sit there rather than pulling it back. "I'm sorry I wasn't what you needed when you were young. I'm sorry it took me so long to be worth trusting." He breathed. "Thank you for trusting me anyway." The light was coming up now, the specific pale gold of early October dawn, thin and cold and honest, the kind of light that didn't flatter anything but made everything visible. It came across the cemetery headstones, and it touched Ethan's stone, and it touched the two paper cranes at the base of it, and it touched Crow's face, and the scar along his jaw, and the silver of his beard, and the worn leather of his cut. He stood. His legs were stiff from the crouching. He straightened slowly, the way a man straightened after a long time down, and he looked at the stone for one more moment. Then he turned and walked back to the bike. He didn't look back. He had been looking back for 6 years. He knew what was there. He knew the name carved in the stone and the dates and the line his son had lived inside of. He knew the crane Lila had left, and the crane he'd made badly with his 2 large hands while a 9-year-old girl talked him through each fold. What he didn't know yet was what was ahead. The chapter house with its punched lock that needed fixing, the 11 envelopes in the cabinet, Naomi Hartwell waking up in a recovery room with her daughter beside her, and the long, uneven road of healing ahead of them. Reed on his taped ankle earning his patch, Marcus and Deja and the clinics, the work. He started the Harley. The engine turned over with its low, familiar growl, the sound that had followed him through 30 years of roads and losses and the specific American dark of moving through the world on a machine that asked nothing of you except that you keep going. He let it run for a moment, sat with it. The sound of the engine in the empty cemetery, the birds in the distance, the cold air moving through the oak trees. Then he rode out through the service road, and the morning came up behind him, and the road ahead opened like a thing that had been waiting, and for the first time in 6 years, Gideon Crow Vance did not feel the weight of all that empty road. He felt the length of it, and that was different. That was enough.